Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar, Creating Welcoming Spaces for Immigrant Families and Early Childhood Programs. My name is Hannah Liu, and I work on the immigration team at the Center for Law and Social Policy, or CLASP. We're a national anti-poverty organization working to advance federal and state policies that support individuals and families with low incomes and communities of color. Our early education and childcare team serves as a bridge between the local, state, and federal levels, facilitating communication to advance policies supporting families' access to childcare and early education. The Immigration and Immigrant Families team advocates for federal and state policy reforms to promote the health, economic security, and overall success for immigrant children, youth, and families. We lead the Children Thrive Action Network, a network of over 130 federal, state, and local organizations with the main goal of defending and supporting children and immigrant families in the United States. So we're going to introduce the speakers now. We have here today Wendy Cervantes, who is the director of the Immigration and Immigrant Families team at CLASP. She is an expert on the cross-sector policy issues impacting children of immigrants with more than 20 years of experience working in federal policy, direct service, and philanthropy. She is also the co-lead of the Children Thrive Action Network and co-founder of the Protecting Immigrant Families Coalition. We also are so excited to welcome Carolina Reyes, the owner and director of the Arco Iris Bilingual Children's Center, AIBCC, in Prince George's County, Maryland. AIBCC is a bilingual childcare center that serves a diverse group of families and children in a full-time and part-time capacity. Carolina is a passionate advocate for early childhood education, including helping teachers, families, and children, and has worked in the field for the last 22 years. So we are so lucky to have her expertise here. To go over what we'll be covering today, we're going to be talking about the impact of immigration policies, both on access to early childhood programs, as well as the impact of immigration policies on young kids. We're going to be talking about promoting access to early childhood programs through protected areas and safe space policies, outreach and support, and cultural competency and language access. And in the end, we'll have some time to answer any questions you may have. Some housekeeping items before we get started. If you have questions at any point, feel free to put them in the chat or use the Q&A function. If you need Spanish interpretation, please go to interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and select Spanish. And after the presentation, we will follow up to all registrants with additional resources and the recording and slides from the webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Wendy.
Thanks, Hannah, and so happy to be with you all today. I'm going to go over how our immigration policies impact immigrants' families' access to early childhood programs. And as a daughter of Mexican immigrants and the mother of 2 young children, these issues are very near and dear to my heart. So next slide. So it's important to remember, first of all, that 1/4 of all young children under 6 in the United States are children of immigrants, meaning they have at least one foreign-born parent. They also represent the fastest growing young child population. The majority, 94%, are US-born citizens, meaning they are entitled to all the rights and benefits of citizen children. However, it's also important to note that there is an increasing number of young children arriving as asylum seekers. And while most immigrant parents have some form of legal status, about 5.4 million children in the US have at least one undocumented parent. Finally, children in immigrant families are a diverse population and make up 1/3 of families in the US with low incomes. Next slide. Immigrant families face many of the same barriers other families experience in accessing early childhood programs, such as lack of awareness or limited availability, but they also face unique challenges due to linguistic and cultural barriers, complicated immigrant eligibility rules, as well as a wide range of immigration-related concerns. Next slide. For those serving immigrants in early childhood programs, it is important to be clear on the eligibility rules. Many of our current rules were created under the 1996 Welfare Reform Law, also referred to as PRORA. It created two categories of immigrants to determine their eligibility for most federal public benefits: qualified and unqualified. Qualified immigrants include lawfully present immigrants or green card holders, refugees, and asylees. For certain programs, qualified immigrants must wait 5 years to access benefits such as Medicaid, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, and Supplemental Security Income. This 5-year waiting period has been removed for children for SNAP, and many states have taken up the option to waive the 5-year bar for children and pregnant women. But even for families where only adults are subject to a waiting period, we know that when parents go without assistance, their children often go without. Immigrants that are unqualified, including recipients of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program, or DACA, individuals with temporary protected status, and undocumented immigrants, are ineligible for most federal public benefits. Next slide. Taking a look at immigrants' eligibility for childcare and early education programs, here's what you need to know. Programs that fall under the Child Care Development Block Grant, CCDBG, are restricted to qualified immigrants in most circumstances, but eligibility is based on the immigration status of the child, not the parents. So since most children are US citizens, that's really important to remember. There are also some CCDBG programs that are exempt from any immigration restrictions, including Head Start collaborations, as well as any program that is subject to public educational standards. Childcare programs funded through the TANF program are primarily based on a parent's eligibility, and therefore qualified immigrants must wait 5 years to be eligible. Head Start is not considered a federal public benefit and therefore is not subject to any immigrant restrictions. We have a fact sheet with this information that we will be sharing with all of you after the webinar. Next slide. I now want to turn to the impact of anti-immigrant policies. CLASP's research on these issues over the years has found that anti-immigrant policies and rhetoric create a chilling effect which deter families from accessing important programs and services. In 2017, shortly after the start of the Trump administration, we conducted a 6-state study where we interviewed more than 150 early childhood educators and spoke with more than 45 immigrant parents. At that time, there was a lot of fear and confusion given the drastic increase in the deportation of parents and efforts to further reduce access to benefits for immigrants. Our findings showed that children as young as 2 and 3 were experiencing high levels of toxic stress. Families were withdrawing from communities, limiting time at parks and even supermarkets, losing access to vital health and nutrition programs. We heard a lot about people not showing up to appointments, for example. There were changes in parental employment and income, and we saw significant mental health impacts on children and parents. These findings were consistent across the 6 states we visited, although worse in places that had experienced immigration raids in homes or in work sites. Families impacted by deportation also experienced additional trauma as well as economic hardship due to the loss of a breadwinner. New slide. In our conversations with program staff, we learned that early childhood programs were also suffering. Programs were experiencing changes in attendance, lower levels of parent engagement, and difficulty connecting families to services. And program staff were stressed. Many told us they felt helpless trying to support families, and many of them were immigrants themselves. Next slide. Unfortunately, some of these same concerns remain today. It is true that things have changed a lot since 2017. We are now recovering from a pandemic that disproportionately harms immigrant families, and there is a new administration with a new approach to immigration. However, we have seen that the chilling effect of immigration policies under the former administration is still impacting families today. and the constant news around immigration and the southern border is also impacting immigrant families all over the country, those that are new as well as those who have been here for years. More recent research, including a series of listening sessions CLASP conducted with immigrant parents, state child care administrators, and a few immigrant child care providers, has found that there is still ongoing confusion about the public charge policy, which may make immigrants hesitant to apply for programs due to concerns that using certain government benefits may impact their ability to access a green card in the future. While the Trump-era public charge rule was terminated and a new rule was finalized under the Biden administration, research shows that concerns about the policy continue to prevent parents from enrolling in healthcare and food assistance programs, even on behalf of their US citizen children, despite the fact that use of such programs would not make them a public charge. There are also concerns about how data provided to early childhood programs will be shared, especially concerns about information being shared with immigration enforcement agents. It is important to remember that there are many civil rights and privacy protections in place that your program should be following to ensure that data is protected. It is also important not to require information that is not necessary, such as Social Security numbers or citizenship status, especially for programs that are available regardless of immigration status. More on that will be covered later. And while less of a concern now, there are still many families around the country that have fears about possibly running into immigration enforcement agents when dropping off their children at childcare or taking them to the doctor. In our research in 2017, we found that despite falling under the sensitive locations policy, which is now known as the protected areas policy, virtually every program staff person we spoke with had no idea that childcare and early education programs fell under the definition of a sensitive location, which restricts immigration enforcement actions in such locations. And in almost every state, we documented instances of agents arresting parents after dropping off a child at childcare or camping out in parking lots, both of which are violations of the policy. Unfortunately, there have also been several state anti-immigrant laws passed or gaining traction recently. Florida and Texas are two examples that are also creating a chilling effect, such as deterring parents from accessing emergency medical care. And there are many states that continue to partner with local police for immigration enforcement, as well as states that deny driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants, both of which are policies that research has found can harm both children's participation in childcare programs as well as the childcare workforce. And finally, immigrant parents still remain unaware of the wide range of programs available to them, as well as supports such as childcare subsidies. And they also have a hard time navigating the enrollment process. Our immigrant population is very diverse, and attitudes about early childhood programs vary across cultures. Targeted and culturally competent outreach to immigrant communities about childcare and early education programs is a major priority, not just about the types of programs available, but also about the benefits of such programs on children's development. Language accessible outreach by trusted community messengers is critical. I'll now turn it over to my co-presenters to go into more detail about how providers can address some of these barriers and create more welcoming spaces for immigrant families. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. So I'm going to talk about protected areas and safe space policies. So what are protected areas? So taking into account the barriers concerns around immigration policies create, as well as the serious negative impact immigration enforcement has on children, it's incredibly important that providers take intentional steps to make their programs more welcoming to families. So the protected areas policy is a federal policy that was put in place in 2021 that replaced the sensitive locations policy that was first introduced in 2011. Except in limited circumstances, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, Customs and Border Protection, CBP agents are prohibited from conducting enforcement actions on or near your program's property. So childcare centers, schools, and other places where children gather are classified as protected areas. Other examples of protected areas include hospitals, places of worship, and places providing social services like food banks. However, in practice, we've heard anecdotally that this rule is not always followed, which is why it's really important for early childhood providers to have a plan in place in case of immigration enforcement actions to protect kids' and families' safety and privacy. So why have a safe space policy? The purpose of a safe space policy is to, one, safeguard the well-being of kids and their families. As Wendy covered earlier, immigration enforcement can have traumatic impacts on children, and having policies in place to minimize their contact with immigration agents in these situations is critical. Number two, it's to ensure your staff are supported. These situations can often be unexpected and stressful, and you want to make sure that everybody is on the same page. So the main components of a safe space policy. The policy should establish staff roles and responsibilities, how staff should interact with federal immigration agents, how you'll minimize disruption, and how you'll notify parents. Your safe space policy should also indicate how you will make information available to parents and staff, how staff will be trained on the policy, and how often it will be revised and updated. You might also want to consider including resources for staff members and parents. We have a one-pager that we're going to share after this webinar that outlines protected areas, and we would encourage you to print it out and post it in your facility. So to go more in depth, for staff roles and responsibilities, you want to make sure that everyone knows what their role is if a situation with immigration enforcement occurs. So who on your staff is responsible to speak to the enforcement agent? Who is responsible for notifying the rest of the staff of their presence? And is there anyone else who should be called, like an off-site staff member or a local immigrant rights group? You also want to establish how staff should interact with federal immigration agents. You want to learn what questions to ask an agent, such as seeing their credentials and authorization, permitting them access to your program's property. This includes a judicial warrant and permission from a supervisor. But ensure above all that staff safety is prioritized in these interactions. More details on interacting with agents can be found in our Safe Spaces guide, which we will send after the webinar. You also want to make a plan for how you'll minimize disruption, to minimize trauma to kids, and to minimize anxiety for parents. Your plan should avoid the possibility of children or their parents seeing or encountering federal immigration agents. And finally, you want to create a plan for how you'll notify parents. It's really important to alert parents of an agent's arrival and departure, especially if agents are present at or around drop-off or pickup. You also want to make sure in this notification that you reassure parents of the steps you are taking to protect their children and their private information. And speaking of private information, as a licensed or regulated early childhood program, you should already have protocols in place for securing your facility's premises and your family's private information. But you also want to make sure that your staff is fully trained up on all of this. Staff should only collect information about children and families that's necessary for enrollment or educational purposes, and families' information should not be disclosed to non-program officials without a court order or parents' consent. You also want to make sure it is clear to parents. They need to understand what protocols are in place that protect their information, and this will help reduce fear and anxiety that they may have around enrollment and accessing your program. So overall, having a safe space policy in place signals to family that you're there for them and you have a plan to keep their kids safe. More information about how to put together a safe space policy can be found in this guide shown here, which also includes a template safe space policy. We're going to share all of this after the webinar. And now I'll pass it over to Carolina to go more in depth about how providers can promote access to early childhood programs for immigrant families.
Hello, everyone. Buenas tardes, buenos días. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this. I am excited to be able to share a little bit this important role that as childcare providers we have. And for me, particularly being an immigrant, you can probably already hear it from my thick accent. I'm an immigrant myself. So just experience what my family experienced as a new immigrant, not knowing language many times, not be able to express right away, our needs is something that, it really touched me. And that is why I created Arcoiris, a place where we are embracing and, appreciating diversity, multiculturalism, and obviously the language, right? So I will talk a little bit about what ways we inform our families, or we as provider can we do to be able to know things like we just learned today, right? This important aspect of this safe place policy, something that many times our licensing specialists in our states don't share with us. But we, in my opinion, once again, we have such a big responsibility that we provide this amazing service for our families. So we need to really take that into heart. And because of that, we need to look for those information, participate in webinars like this one, for instance, to be able to participate in any, directors' coffee hours if you have any around your local or state, group. Be member of organizations about early childhood education, right? That you can learn and you can be up to date about regulations and changes that are happening that are going to be affecting our families and children. We also need to be able to share this information with them, right? But one example that I can share with you in Arco, it is, for instance, we do a lot of newsletters. We use now everybody's using the social media. So we have class dojo, for instance, that we can communicate with our parents as a class and also one-on-one with them. And also one important aspect of our field in childcare, if it's family or center, we have the opportunity to have more one-on-one with our families, something that, when they will go to the preschool system, they're going to be missing. And the fact that we can learn from them, we start also establishing strong relationships, and we are able to know what is happening. We are able to learn what are the more maybe personal needs for the children and the families. We also, we can do participate in public policy meetings. I think at some point, as we heard today, many of our families come to this country from different venues and different ways, right? And some of them are scared. They are worried. And when you participate in public policy meetings or advocacy groups, you're able to learn, like today, what things we can do to make the environment, a happy place, a place where they are known that they can feel secure, that they have a support system. And with that, I will move to exactly what, I think it was Wendy or Hannah that mentioned that assessing family needs is something very important. So as an immigrant myself, I really pay attention to this particular scenario because many times our parents are worried and concerned and they don't know what they can access or what resources they can, have on them. So we, once again, always have this idea of be aware what our families need. You can let them know that we are here to support them, that there are resources available for them, that they are part of a community and they have a saying. We are living in a country that is created by immigrants. So we can support our families by, just showing support to them. For instance, one thing that I did for my community is that this year I partnered with Head Start, something that I never did for the last 9 years in my program. And why did I do that? I did this because I wanted to reach out to other part of my community, families who in the past were not able to come to my center because they were not able to afford it. But now I learned that Head Start is able to provide more resources for them. And one important aspect with Head Start that it really caught me and brought me as an immigrant was that Head Start does not ask for any legal status for the children. Any child can participate in Head Start and without being a USA citizen or having a residency. And that is something that as an advocate right now, I also take into heart, and I am advocated at my state level here in Maryland, where the CCA, which is the Child Care Scholarship right now, provide assistance for our children here. However, the child must be a USA citizen or have some type of legal, status. And to me, that's a big barrier. We should be able to advocate that has to stop. We want our children to be part of, high quality early learning environments. So that's an important role of directors and teachers as well, that we can advocate for them and support them with that. The other aspect that I think is important when we are assessing the family's needs is that we are a diverse community. We are a diverse country. So therefore, our teachers need to look like our children in the classroom. We need to embrace and support their language, their home language, and make sure that they hold tight to that. They asked me to talk about the important roles as providers, as a support system. Many of us are just the support system for these families. They don't have a family, extended family, so they rely on us. So once again, the relationship that we establish with our families is so fundamental and so essential, because we can learn from them and we can establish, once again, this amazing opportunity that we have in our hands. So once again, as a childcare providers, we have an important role in early childhood education. The other thing that we can create are relationships and partnership with other organizations that maybe provide services for our families. So we can share that with them, right? And once again, I think today we just learned the Safe Place Policy. That is an amazing tool that is gonna be shared with you guys. So our families and our teachers can understand that when they come to our schools, they are safe. There is no way to be concerned. I will share with you that unfortunately we hear today that when we have that era of Trump a few years ago, the fear in our immigrant community was visible. We could see it, we can smell it, and we can feel it. And to that, it gave us, many of us like providers, this sensation that we needed to do so much more for these families and children, that we needed to create this environment. And I learned that once they are here with us, we are securing their, peace of mind. So families can go to work and make sure that their child is not going to be taken away because they are in a protected area. And that is something that I learned because I could see the fear of my families, and I look into what can I do to make sure that nobody could come here and take anyone. And that's how I learned about it this in the past. The other aspect that I want to also talk as providers, the cultural competency and the language access that we need to embrace in our centers are very important as well. So as we know, we are a very diverse group of, families and children in our country. And it's important for us to always acknowledge who you have at your center. You know, I don't know how you do it, but you can do in the registration enrollment form, ask what language do you speak, you know, if you have more than one language, and try to implement it in the classroom. And when we identify and understand this, we are valuing the families and children, and the families feel seen. For example, one of the things that we do in our school is that if we have a family who may not speak English or Spanish, we try to ask the families to give us and share familiar words, like how you say hi, how are you, or what are the important aspects that we can say, so we can learn that in that language. So doing that little thing, we are embracing it, and we are taking in consideration this child and these families as unique of who they are. The other aspect that you can also show in your classroom, the competency and language, is by providing and creating an environment with toys, with pictures, books from this child country or cultural important relevance. Many of our families as well, they need another support system as well. For instance, they can help one another, right? So when you create environments where families feel that they are seen, they come together and they help one another. So that is another aspect that we do also in Arcoiris. We create family engagement activities, field trips. We do back to school nights. So that way they can help one another, and they can have an enriched environment and bring what they want into the classroom. There is also the opportunity where home language is developed. We must tell our families to hold tight to their language. You know, we live in a country that English is everywhere. Our children will learn English no matter what. So it's important for our families to be empowered and reinforce that it's important to keep their culture as well, and not to lose that, because sometimes there's a misconception of our families or immigrants that come to us and they think that they need to speak English only because they want to have, you know, more opportunities. But once again, we have seen that we are a country that is full of immigrants, and we have a saying. We live here now, and we can change, and we can be advocates for a better change for our children. So how can we embrace diversity and empower our families? Once again, I think I had mentioned many much in the past. And once again, give parents the opportunity. For instance, an example that I have faced this past week, we have a child who needs additional resources. Families were asking and reaching out to that resource, but they were saying there is not available, it is a waiting list. So you provide these parents words, vocabulary, you know, how you can reach out to them and let them know what they can do to advocate for their children. Many times parents don't do it because they don't want to, but they don't do it because they don't know how. So maybe we can, you know, embrace that and support them by providing, you know, these resources again. Let's see what else I have here. How to empower them, once again, help them to be advocates for their children, let them know that they have a saying, that they are the first educators, that we support them, that we are here for them. Tell them that their stories matter, that their experiences matters, that we can create change with them, that once again, we live in a country that is full of immigrants, and, you know, together with them and the children, we create a big impact in the early childhood education. And one more thing that I will add is that in this field in America, we need to start elevating it, and we need the help of them. So when you empower them, you tell them to share their stories. and they can come and they can participate, for instance, in local, a local or state or national levels, telling them stories. When we have a law that is passing that is going to be affecting, their children, early childhood education in general, they can come and do testimony. They can have a saying in what their children are going to be experiencing. And I will end by saying that early childhood education in America needs to start having a big, change of how we are being perceived. I'm sorry, when I get nervous, my English, it gets all over the place, but I just want to end with this. Many of you are all around this country. Now I know that they're from different states, but we need to start advocating and making sure that, America see early childhood education as something that starts at birth. Unfortunately, I have seen many times that, when you go and talk about early childhood education, or the public investments go to kindergarten and above, and we forget the important role of early childhood education starting at birth. So advocate for that, advocate for the families. Obviously, in this particular theme today is the immigrant community, but we need to embrace early childhood education as something very important, and we need to start investing in it. Les quiero decir a todos, las que están escuchando hoy día, que educación infantil es muy importante. Les quiero decir que es la hora de empezar a hablar para poder estar invirtiendo en esta educación infantil que es tan importante para nosotros. Apoyando a nuestra comunidad inmigrante es súper importante. Debemos apoyarlos. Nosotros muchas veces somos el apoyo para nuestras familias y nuestro rol como educadores es esencial. Así que nunca se olviden de que el trabajo que ustedes hacen es valioso y es muy importante para la sociedad. Just I say that our job as early educators is such an important role that we never forget that we are making changes and we are relevant for our families and children. So your job as a child care provider, even though many times we are not being seen, we are important. And we are making a big impact on the children's life and families.
Thank you so much, Carolina, for that. Obviously, you have like the long expertise, but also for emphasizing how important providers are in the lives of immigrant families. So thank you so much for that presentation. All right, so now we are moving on to our question and answer portion. I've seen we've already collected some questions in the chat and the Q&A function. So I'm going to go ahead, we've collected them here. I'm gonna go ahead and just ask the question, either Carolina or Wendy, feel free to pop in when you feel like you can answer. All right, so the first question we have here is for Carolina. How do you merge the idea for families to keep their language and their culture versus the culture barrier as per your presentation? So I think it's for advice for how to keep their language and against the cultural barrier.
Well, first I want to say that when we change the mentality, right? Like if we help our families and we as providers to understand that we are a country that it was created by immigrants, and we are a large minority, but if we embrace that at first, we need to help and educate our families that it's important to value and continue having your culture within your family. Once again, English is going to be for kindergarten to high school years. And many times, unfortunately, the public school system doesn't have a second language as a language to learn. So their family's role is to be able to keep it. And I think when you, once again, establish this relationship with your families, because it's not just dropping your child, but learning much more. And when you do it at the first tour and you tell them that, look, English is gonna come, do not worry. We are changing as a country. Our teachers in the public school system are embracing and are understanding that, we have a variety of children who speak more than one language at home. And therefore, they are getting ready. They are being prepared. And our job as a family is to be able to maintain that. So you need to constantly support them and let them know that it's okay. That it's okay, because when you hear families who are second or third generation that I have, you know, they didn't learn English because the parents were scared, because these parents were not well informed to or supported that your language matter, that you are unique by your culture, by your language, for what you bring to this country. And that's what America is so beautiful, because we are a beautiful group of people, different colors, culture, you know, language. So we need to be able to learn it and keep it in our hearts to be able to transfer it to our families. Hopefully that answered your question.
Great, thank you so much. Wendy, do you have anything to add?
Carolina said that beautifully. I was just going to add that I do think that similar to what Carolina said, is that unfortunately it's mostly been our systems over time that just haven't valued people's cultures and have made culture a barrier because they haven't seen, and made people feel like their culture was important. And so I think a lot of the strategies that Carolina talked about really get at that problem. And also I think, this isn't just amongst the immigrant community, but there are cultural views about reservations about putting young children in educational settings, for example. And I think it really just takes the effort and, once again, trusted messengers from the community to help parents understand the many benefits that children get from early childhood programs, and helping them develop both languages and being able to be ready for school. And then I think it really that making that connection with the families is something that takes time and is usually most beneficial when a trusted community messenger brings that to them.
Great, thank you. So moving on to the next question. Can you give advice for how providers can stay up to date on changing policies related to immigration and early education and childcare, advice or resources?
I'm happy to take that one. I think we have a slide at the end of this presentation, but as Hannah mentioned earlier, we help oversee a network called the Children Thrive Action Network, which has a website and a newsletter. Folks can sign up for the newsletter to get relevant policy updates on what's happening with regards to immigration policy, but also around any changing policies regarding access to benefits, including access to early childhood programs. So we would encourage folks to sign up for that newsletter.
And may I add something as well? I think that once again, I think I say at the end of the presentation, early childhood education, as an immigrant, when I came to this country, I was a little bit shocked to see how was not being seen as it should be. Okay, so therefore, when you bring people to the field, we really need to start putting ourselves at the table. I think for me, particularly after the pandemic, when we hear that the states, probably each state took care of all the public school system, but childcare was not even mentioned. We were not even being part of the equation. We were not taken care of. We have children. So with that, give you the power. Your stories, your experiences matter. And when I have learned that when you go out there and you share your stories, you can create change, like I say many times. So what you can do, reach out to your resource centers in your local area, belong to organizations. NACYS is one of this national, they have a public policy every year where you can learn about what is happening at the national level. You probably have in your own state organizations that work for early childhood education in all settings, infant and toddler program, preschool, family childcare providers, center providers, and constantly find information. Share with the news, with your local newspaper, what is happening. If it's something is happening around, for instance, the childcare scholarship that is not working properly, the system is not providing the system necessary for our families to access quality early childhood education, make a saying. contact the news and let them know we want to be heard. We want to make this public because our community need to know, once again, the important role of early childhood education at birth. You know, we in America, unfortunately, we think that education starts at kindergarten, and it's not. The social and emotional foundation for the children's prior to kindergarten is so essential, and therefore, as a community in all areas. And that is why when we start networking, that is when we need to start childcare providers, family childcare provider, public school system, organizations who work in this, you know, Child Care of Aware of America, Mom Rising, all of these organizations, they come together for the common purpose, which is our children and families. And working together, once again, I think we will create a huge change.
Thank you so much, Carolina. And along with that, along the same thread, there's another question about, can you talk about some of the advocacy you've done as a provider on behalf of immigrant families and maybe talk about some of the impact you've been able to have?
Yes, yes. I think that once again, I think I start paying attention to the public policy idea and the role that, you know, we have in creating, you know, laws and creating a little of a change when we do things. But once again, when the pandemic arrived, I was like injected with this fuel of making this change because we were not being seen. And to me and for my colleagues and for my teachers in childcare has been a moral problem because we do so much and we are not being appreciated, right? So with that said, I think one particular example that I have been part of it is after the pandemic, we noticed that families were not working. Then in 2021, 2022, you know, families start coming, particularly in 2021, at the end of it, all these families needed to go back to work. And many of them, they didn't have the financial resources to be able to pay for childcare, right? So in my state, the childcare scholarship was a problem. The time frame, the fact that they didn't have a language access for many of my immigrant community. They were not able to do, for instance, applications in the right way because they were not understanding. The time frame was so long. The miscommunication was not right. The translation of the documents were not also in the right place. So when you start sharing these stories and you empower your families to go and tell their stories at, you know, the public, you know, organizations, to the state legislation, to the elected officials, and they start listening from us, once again, you create a change. So we were happy that we worked, it was not just me, but many of us, many of our advocates like me, we advocated to change the childcare scholarship in the state of Maryland, where we have the presentable eligibility, which is only, I believe, 4 or 5 states in the United States who have it, where parents who apply for the childcare scholarship, they have to have a coverage for a month while the process of evaluation of application, it takes. So we have that now, right? And now more families are able to access, but we still have things to work. MSDE in my state, which is the state of education of Maryland, we're working hard to be able to accommodate that. There are things that need to be improved, yes, all the time. But that's the beauty of, you know, working together, elevating the issues, so that way we can improve it once again for the families and children, and now for our teachers too, because the teachers who work in the field need to have, you know, the support as well from us. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Here's another question from an attendee. So looking at the protected areas, is licensed family childcare and licensed exempt childcare considered a protected area? Not sure if this would fall under the school section and if this type of care would be considered as a pre-kindergarten program. I think that's a question for you, Wendy.
Can I see the question?
Yes, it's in the question and answer.
Oh, got it. Okay. So yes, this is actually very interesting. This was something that came up under the previous version of the policy where they had not created a definition specifically around family-spaced childcare, and it's actually left largely undefined under the current policy, under the current protected areas policy. So I do think that it's kind of on a case-by-case basis. ICE has said that Immigration and Customs Enforcement has said that to the extent that if it's a family-based program, if there's some sort of at least signage outside the home, for example, and that if it is a licensed childcare, family childcare provider, that it should fall under the protected areas policy.
Thank you so much.
And that should be specified within the guide that we're going to be sharing with folks as well.
Right, in the follow-up resources. All right, so this is the last question we can answer. We have time to answer. We see home or family-based childcare providers as critical to delivering access to culturally responsive care to immigrant families. Are there specific supports we should be considering for these types of providers?
I agree. I think we should, have more support for family childcare providers. Like I say over and over, I think many times childcare in general is not being seen. And unfortunately, my colleagues in the family childcare settings are not being seen either. So I agree. I think we should have more support systems for you as a field. But once again, I think your role, whoever wrote that question, you have a role. You have the opportunity to exactly do that. I am a family childcare provider. I do so much for my family and a very unique environment, which is important to highlight, right? Because this is the beauty of childcare, in my opinion. We are able to have more opportunities with our families. Our relationships are stronger. So I encourage you as a family provider that you just asked this question, go out there and reach out to organizations, reach out to your local groups who are advocating, and put yourself at the table. Say, I want to have a say in, and I need to have more resources, where I can find them, what else I can have.
And I'll just add to that, the licensing process for, to become a licensed family-based provider is also very difficult, and could be definitely improved, and something that many advocates are looking into.
Thank you both, and thank you all so much for your questions. To respond to a question earlier about resources, yes, we will be sending the presentation, the slides, and the recording to all the registrants after this webinar. Also, if you have any resources that you want to have, if you want more information on things, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll collect them, and we can send them along as additional resources after this webinar. So, in conclusion, we wanted to talk about some takeaways from this webinar. So to sum up, restrictive and confusing eligibility guidelines and anti-immigrant policies deter families from accessing programs and services, including early childhood programs, which is why programs must ensure that they protect the safety and data privacy of kids and families. Providers should and can go beyond what is legally required to foster welcoming environments in their programs. So as Carolina mentioned, we just want to underscore how important the voices of providers are in speaking up on behalf of immigrant families, speaking out against anti-immigrant policies that harm children and deter families from seeking out resources and services, and speaking up for policies that make sure families have everything they need to thrive. And so along with that, here are some resources that will be sent after the webinar, along with the slides and recording. This includes the eligibility guide, the protected areas fact sheet, which is in English and Spanish, and the safe spaces guide. Oh, I skipped a slide here. So taking action, as Carolina mentioned, we just want to we wanted to, if you would like to stay engaged with our efforts, we encourage your organization to join the Children Thrive Action Network or sign up for our newsletter. All right. So now the speakers, big thanks again to both Wendy and Carolina for joining me. If you have any additional questions, the contact information of the speakers can be found on the screen. And again, please continue to put any resources you would like in the chat. And thank you all so much for coming, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you all.